Bill Clinton thought he could intimidate Texas Governor Greg Abbott during their heated exchange at the Democratic Leadership Conference. The former president, with all his political experience and his charm, decided to go after the conservative governor's policies in front of hundreds of party insiders. What happened next left Clinton visibly shaken and may have just proven that Republican leadership in Texas won't be silenced or undermined. Not even by a former president. The 42nd president of the United States stood at the podium, his signature smirk fading as Governor Abbott, seated in his wheelchair, prepared to respond with documents in hand. What Abbott revealed about Clinton's own past scandals and the failures of Democratic leadership turned the entire conference upside down and sent shockwaves through the political establishment. The atmosphere in the room was electric with tension. Democratic donors who had paid thousands to attend this exclusive event watched in stunned silence as two powerful figures from opposing parties faced off in what would become a defining moment. Political strategists furiously scribbled notes, recognizing they were witnessing the kind of confrontation that reshapes political dynamics overnight. Before we dive into this explosive clash, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss moments like these where seasoned presidents get challenged by resilient state leaders. Now let's see how Greg Abbott turned the tables on Bill Clinton. To understand the magnitude of what happened, you need to know exactly who these two political figures are and why this confrontation matters so much to the future of American politics. At 78 years old, William Jefferson Clinton remains one of the most influential voices in Democratic circles. The former Arkansas governor served as president from 1993 to 2001, leading the country through economic prosperity and political scandals. His wife Hillary's failed presidential campaigns in 2008 and 2016 haven't diminished his status as party royalty. Clinton built his reputation on Southern charm, political cunning, and an ability to connect with voters that earned him the nickname the Comeback Kid. But Clinton's legacy isn't without controversy. From the Paula Jones lawsuit to the Monica Lewinsky scandal, his presidency was marked by legal battles and questions about his character. His law license was suspended in Arkansas, and he faced impeachment proceedings. Yet somehow he's managed to maintain his position as an elder statesman whose opinion still carries weight in Democratic politics. On the other side stands Greg Abbott, the 66-year-old governor of Texas who has become one of the most influential Republican leaders in the nation. Before entering politics, Abbott served as the Texas Attorney General and was a justice on the Texas Supreme Court. He graduated from Vanderbilt Law School and built his reputation on a staunch defense of conservative values, state sovereignty, and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. As governor, Abbott has become known for his hardline stances on border security, gun rights, and limiting federal intervention in Texas affairs, making him a central figure in America's ongoing ideological battles. Greg Abbott represents the state of Texas as its long-serving governor, commanding influence far beyond Austin. Since taking office in 2015, he's become known for his firm stances on border security, gun rights, and limiting federal interference in state affairs. His background as Texas Attorney General and former justice on the Texas Supreme Court gives him a powerful legal foundation, and he's never been afraid to wield it in political battles. This wasn't just any ordinary political disagreement. The Democratic Leadership Conference was meant to be a unity event, bringing together party leaders to strategize for upcoming elections. Instead, it became a battleground between a former Democratic president and one of the most prominent Republican governors in the nation. For Clinton, this was about maintaining his influence and relevance in a party that's increasingly moving away from the centrist positions he championed in the 1990s. His criticism of conservative figures like Abbott reflected broader tensions between Democrats and Republicans about the future direction of the country. For Abbott, this moment represented something much bigger. As a Republican governor of one of America's largest states, he often finds himself scrutinized by Democrats who question his policies and priorities. Clinton's attack on Abbott's leadership wasn't just personal. It was emblematic of how conservative leaders are often portrayed by Democratic elites as regressive or out of touch with national progress. The room was filled with Democratic donors, activists, and elected officials from across the country. Camera phones were recording, and political reporters were taking notes. Whatever happened in this exchange would quickly spread throughout political circles and social media. potentially reshaping relationships and power dynamics not only within the Democratic Party, but also across the partisan divide. The tension had been building throughout the day at the conference. Several speakers had addressed the need for party unity and finding common ground between different factions. But when it came time for the open discussion period, the gloves came off. Bill Clinton approached the microphone with his characteristic confidence, adjusting his tie and flashing that familiar smile that had charmed voters for decades. The room fell silent as the former president prepared to speak. Many expected him to offer words of wisdom or share insights from his years of political experience. Instead, Clinton decided to go on the attack. "You know, I've been watching some of these Republican governors," Clinton began, his voice carrying that distinctive Arkansas drawl. "And I have to say, I'm concerned about the direction they're taking the country. We've got folks making decisions who barely have the vision to handle a school board dispute, let alone national policy." The room stirred uncomfortably. Several attendees exchanged glances, sensing that Clinton was about to cross a line, but he wasn't finished. "Take Governor Abbott here," Clinton continued, gesturing toward where Abbott was seated. "He talks a big game about leadership, but what has he actually accomplished? Passing laws that hurt women's rights, creating unnecessary battles over immigration, and turning Texas into a laboratory for division. That's not the kind of leadership we need when we're talking about the future of millions of Americans." The former president's words hung in the air like a challenge. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people processed what they had just heard. Some Clinton loyalists nodded in agreement, while others looked shocked that he would directly attack a sitting governor at what was supposed to be a unity event. The atmosphere in the conference hall shifted dramatically. Democratic leaders who had been chatting casually suddenly sat up straight, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. A former president publicly confronting a sitting Republican governor wasn't just political theater. It was a risky move that could deepen partisan divides. Several attendees immediately reached for their phones, knowing that this moment would soon be all over social media. Others leaned forward in their seats, waiting to see how Abbott would respond to such a direct challenge from one of the party's most powerful figures. Nancy Pelosi, sitting in the front row, shook her head slightly and whispered something to the person next to her. Chuck Schumer looked visibly uncomfortable, clearly not expecting this level of confrontation at what was meant to be a strategic planning session. But Clinton wasn't done yet. Emboldened by the murmurs of agreement from some corners of the room, he decided to double down on his attack. "The American people are watching," Clinton continued, his voice growing more animated. "They see governors like Abbott turning every issue into a political stunt, signing bills for applause lines and social media clips. But where's the substance? Where's the leadership that truly unites rather than divides? Where are the policies that strengthen all Americans instead of just energizing a base?" He paused for effect, scanning the room to gauge reactions. Some audience members were nodding along, particularly older establishment Democrats who had grown frustrated with the Republican resistance to federal initiatives. Others looked increasingly uncomfortable with the personal nature of Clinton's attacks. "I'm not saying experience is everything," Clinton added, clearly building to a bigger point. "But when you're dealing with constitutional law, with federal regulations, with legislation that could affect millions of jobs and families, you need more than partisan grandstanding and a flood of press conferences. You need leadership grounded in results, not rhetoric." The former president's words were calculated and deliberate. He was drawing a line between the Democratic establishment that valued pragmatic governance and Republican leaders like Abbott, who thrived on bold, polarizing stances. Throughout Clinton's attack, Greg Abbott had remained seated, his expression calm, but his mind racing. As a seasoned attorney and governor of one of the nation's largest states, he was no stranger to hostile opponents or political pressure. He knew that how he responded to this moment would define not just this confrontation, but potentially his standing on the national stage. Those who knew Abbott well could see the subtle signs that he was preparing for battle. His posture straightened slightly in his wheelchair, his jaw set with determination, and his eyes focused with laser-like intensity on the former president. He had faced down federal lawsuits, political protests, and intense media scrutiny throughout his career. Bill Clinton might be a former president, but in this moment, he was just another opponent who had underestimated him. As Clinton continued his attack, Abbot quietly reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder of documents. Several people sitting near him noticed the movement, but most of the room remained focused on the former president's speech. What made Clinton's attack particularly calculated was his choice of venue and timing. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was a deliberate attempt to weaken Abbott's credibility in front of Democratic insiders and the national media. It was a deliberate attempt to put Abbott in his place in front of the Democratic Party's most influential figures. Clinton had clearly planned this moment, choosing to attack Abbott's policies because he believed it would be the governor's weakest point. The former president's team had likely briefed him on Abbott's background, focusing on what they saw as potential vulnerabilities. His staunch conservative stances on immigration, abortion, and federal oversight, along with his long tenure as governor, were all factors Clinton's advisors probably identified as targets for criticism. But what Clinton and his team failed to understand was that Abbott's background, as a former Texas Attorney General and Supreme Court Justice, had actually prepared him perfectly for this exact type of confrontation. In courtrooms and in the governor's office, he had faced fierce legal challenges, hostile media, and endless lawsuits from political opponents who questioned his policies and his leadership. He had learned not just to defend himself, but to turn those attacks into weapons. Clinton was building toward his conclusion, clearly believing he had successfully put Abbott in his place and demonstrated his continued relevance in Democratic politics. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never lost a major political confrontation. "What I'm saying is simple," Clinton declared, his tone becoming more forceful. "We need leaders with proven track records of building consensus, not governors who think signing controversial bills and generating headlines qualifies as national leadership. The stakes are too high for partisan experiments." The room fell silent as Clinton finished his attack. Many attendees looked toward Abbott, waiting to see how he would respond. Some probably expected him to remain silent or offer a measured response that wouldn't escalate the confrontation further. They were about to be very surprised. Greg Abbott reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder of documents. Every eye in the room turned toward him as he began maneuvering his wheelchair deliberately toward the microphone. The silence was thick, each second stretching the anticipation of what was about to unfold. The former president, still standing near the podium, watched Abbott's approach with a slight smirk on his face. He probably thought he had won this exchange before it even began. After all, he was Bill Clinton, charming, experienced, and politically savvy. What could a Republican governor possibly say that would challenge his authority in a Democratic stronghold? He was about to find out exactly what Greg Abbott was capable of when pushed into a corner. What happened next would go down as one of the most devastating political clapbacks in recent history. Abbott didn't just defend himself. He systematically dismantled Clinton's attack and turned his own words against him in a way that left the former president visibly shaken. As Abbott reached the microphone, he didn't immediately begin speaking. Instead, he took a moment to look directly at Clinton, then slowly scanned the room, making eye contact with various attendees. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, building tension and anticipation. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and absolutely devastating. "Thank you, Mr. President, for that interesting assessment of my record," he began, his tone respectful, but with an edge that suggested he was about to unleash something powerful. "Before I respond to your concerns about my leadership, I think it's important that everyone in this room understands exactly what kind of record we're actually discussing." The room remained silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Clinton's smirk began to fade as he recognized the controlled intensity in Abbott's voice, the same tone he had used countless times in courtrooms and press briefings when he was about to dismantle an opponent's case. "You mentioned my record as governor as if it's somehow less significant than other forms of political leadership," Abbott continued, his confidence growing with each word. "Let me educate you about what being governor of Texas actually means, since it seems there might be some confusion." He opened his folder and pulled out the first document. "As governor, I've signed over 1,000 pieces of legislation into law. I've overseen the creation of one of the strongest job markets in the nation, ensured record investments in border security, defended constitutional rights in federal court, and led my state through natural disasters, pandemics, and economic turbulence. This isn't small-time governing. This is protecting citizens' livelihoods and securing their freedoms. The audience began to stir as they realized Abbott wasn't just defending himself, he was going on the offensive. Several attendees who had been nodding along with Clinton's criticisms now looked uncomfortable as they recognized the power and precision of Abbott's response. But let's talk about experience that really matters for governing, Abbott continued, his voice gaining strength. I served as Texas Attorney General, where I took on the federal government more than 30 times to defend constitutional liberties. I served as a justice on the Texas Supreme Court, ruling on complex constitutional questions. I didn't just read about governance in a textbook. I've lived it in every branch of government. This is where Abbott revealed his true strategic brilliance. Rather than offering only a general defense of his qualifications, he had come prepared with specific documentation that would turn Clinton's attack completely around. Since you brought up qualifications and leadership experience, Mr. President, I think it's only fair that we examine everyone's record, Abbott said, pulling out another document from his folder. After all, if we're going to question credibility, we should be thorough about it. The room's energy shifted dramatically. Attendees who had been passively watching suddenly sat up straighter, sensing that Abbott was about to drop a bombshell. Clinton's expression changed from confidence to concern as he realized this wasn't going to be the easy victory he had expected. This, Abbott announced, holding up the document for the room to see, is a copy of the order from the Arkansas Legal Disciplinary Committee from the year 2001. The order that suspended your law license for 5 years following your testimony in the Paula Jones case. A collective gasp went through the room. Many attendees knew about Clinton's legal troubles during his presidency, but few expected those issues to be brought up so directly and forcefully at a national political event. The order specifically states that you gave false and misleading testimony and engaged in conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice, Abbott continued, reading directly from the document. So when we're talking about qualifications and ethical standards, perhaps we should consider what it means when someone's law license gets suspended for dishonesty. The former president's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and what appeared to be genuine shock, that his own legal troubles were being thrown back at him so directly. His famous composure cracked as he realized Abbott had not only defended himself, but had turned the attack into a devastating counterattack. Clinton tried to interject, raising his hand and saying, "Now that's not fair." But Abbott smoothly continued, not giving him a chance to regain control of the narrative. "I'm not finished, Mr. President," Abbott said firmly but respectfully. "Since you question my ability to handle complex issues of governance, let's examine the complexity of your own record." What made Abbott's response so devastating wasn't just that he brought up Clinton's past legal troubles. It was how thoroughly and professionally he dismantled the former president's credibility on the very issue Clinton had chosen to attack him on. The Arkansas suspension wasn't your only legal challenge, Abbott continued, pulling out yet another document. There was also the $850,000 settlement payment to Paula Jones, the contempt of court citation, and the agreement to surrender your law license rather than face potential disbarment proceedings. Each revelation hit like a precision strike. Abbott wasn't just throwing mud. He was systematically demonstrating that Clinton's own record was far more problematic than anything Democrats had accused him of as governor. "Now, I want to be clear," Abbott said, his tone becoming more forceful. "I'm not bringing this up to relitigate the past or to disrespect your service as president. I'm bringing it up because you chose to question my leadership and my qualifications in front of this room full of political leaders." The audience was completely captivated. Many were recording on their phones, recognizing they were witnessing a historic moment. Others were whispering to each other, trying to process what they were seeing. But Abbott saved his most powerful moment for last. Instead of just defending himself or attacking Clinton, he pivoted to a broader message about respect, experience, and the future of American leadership. "You want to talk about the kind of experience that really matters for governing?" he asked, his voice rising with passion. "Let me tell you what I've learned as governor of Texas. I've learned how to fight for the security of millions of people. I've learned how to challenge a federal government that too often overreaches. I've learned how to stand up for the rights of families, for business owners, and for anyone else who feels silenced or ignored by Washington." The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "And I've learned something else that's really important for leadership," he continued, looking directly at Clinton. "I've learned that your past actions and credibility matter when you're asking people to trust your judgment. I've learned that if you're going to question someone else's qualifications, you better make sure your own record can withstand the same scrutiny." Abbot paused for effect, letting his words sink in before delivering what would become the most quoted line from the entire exchange. "So, Mr. President, with all due respect to your service and your experience, maybe, just maybe, before you question whether a Texas governor has enough experience to lead, you should consider whether someone whose law license was suspended for dishonesty is really the best person to be making that judgment." The room erupted. Some people gasped audibly, others started clapping, and still others looked shocked at the directness of Abbott's response. Several attendees were frantically typing on their phones, knowing that this moment would be all over social media within minutes. Clinton stood there visibly stunned. The man who had built his political career on his ability to talk his way out of any situation appeared genuinely speechless. His famous charm and quick wit had completely abandoned him in the face of Abbott's methodical dismantling of his attack. The energy in the conference hall had completely shifted. What had started as Clinton's attempt to put a Republican governor in his place had become a masterclass in how to respond to political attacks with facts, preparation, and surgical precision. Many of the attendees who had initially nodded along with Clinton's criticisms now looked embarrassed. Others who had remained neutral were clearly impressed by Abbott's response. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Clinton now looked like an out-of-touch elder trying to intimidate a seasoned leader, while Abbot appeared as a competent professional who wouldn't be bullied by anyone regardless of their status. Several prominent Democrats in the audience were seen whispering to each other, clearly recognizing that they had just witnessed something significant. This wasn't just a personal confrontation. It was a symbolic clash between an aging Democratic icon and one of the most prominent Republican governors in America, proving that Abbot could hold his own against the old establishment. The moment would soon become a defining example of how the balance of power in American politics was shifting, with conservative leaders refusing to defer automatically to Democratic elites who had dominated the narrative for decades. The immediate aftermath of Abbott's devastating response to Bill Clinton created ripple effects that extended far beyond the conference room. Within hours, the confrontation had become a viral sensation, reshaping conversations about national leadership, partisan conflict, and the future of American governance. As Abbott finished his response and wheeled back to his seat, the conference hall remained in stunned silence for several long seconds. Then slowly applause began to build from different sections of the audience. What started as scattered clapping grew into sustained applause, with many attendees rising to their feet. Clinton, still standing near the podium, appeared unsure of how to respond. The former president, who had built his career on always having the perfect comeback, looked genuinely rattled. He eventually managed a weak smile and a brief nod toward Abbott, but his usual political grace had clearly abandoned him. Several prominent Democrats in attendance immediately recognized the significance of what they had just witnessed. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, sitting 3 rows back, was seen nodding thoughtfully, while Senator Elizabeth Warren leaned over to colleagues, likely discussing the implications of the exchange. The conference moderator, clearly unprepared for such a dramatic confrontation, struggled to regain control of the event. After a few awkward moments, they called for a brief recess, giving attendees time to process what had happened and allowing the political implications to begin sinking in. Within minutes of the exchange, clips and descriptions of Abbott's response began flooding social media platforms. The hashtag Abbott vs. Clinton started trending almost immediately, with users sharing their reactions to the confrontation. Conservative activists and Republican voters were particularly enthusiastic in their support for Abbott. Many saw his response as a perfect example of how a strong Republican leader should handle attempts by Democratic icons to undermine conservative leadership. One viral tweet captured the sentiment. "Greg Abbott just showed every Republican leader how to respond when establishment Democrats try to question your record. Come with facts, come with results, and never back down." This is what leadership looks like. The legal and political communities also took notice of the exchange. Several prominent attorneys and constitutional scholars praised Abbott's preparation and presentation, noting that his response demonstrated exactly the kind of legal and strategic acumen that Clinton had mocked. Progressive commentators, meanwhile, found themselves in the unusual position of defending Clinton against a Republican governor. But many admitted the irony that Clinton's own legal troubles had been used so effectively against him. Some suggested that the exchange exposed broader vulnerabilities within the Democratic establishment. Major news outlets quickly picked up the story, with political reporters and analysts offering various interpretations of what the confrontation meant for the future of American politics. Several themes emerged from the coverage. Many commentators focused on how the exchange represented a broader shift in the balance of power between establishment Democrats and assertive Republican leaders. Abbott's willingness to challenge Clinton directly was seen as evidence that Democrats could no longer rely on past prestige and name recognition to silence opposition. Political analysts praised Abbott's obvious preparation for potential confrontations. His decision to bring documentation and his ability to turn Clinton's attack around demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking many voters want to see from national leaders. Several commentators also noted the partisan dynamics at play in the confrontation. Clinton's decision to target a sitting Republican governor and Abbott's forceful response highlighted the deepening divide between the two parties and the growing unwillingness of Republican leaders to defer to Democratic authority. The legal community's response to the exchange was largely positive for Abbott. Many attorneys pointed out that his background as a former Texas Attorney General and Supreme Court Justice represented exactly the kind of real-world legal experience that should be valued in national leadership. In the days following the confrontation, Clinton's team went into damage control mode. The former president initially remained silent about the exchange, but eventually released a statement through his spokesperson, attempting to clarify his remarks. President Clinton has enormous respect for Governor Abbott and for leaders across the political spectrum who are working to advance the country's values. His comments were intended to emphasize the importance of experience in government, not to question anyone's individual qualifications or competence. However, the statement did little to stop the wave of commentary and analysis already spreading across the nation. However, the statement was widely seen as insufficient given the directness of Clinton's original attack and the thoroughness of Abbott's response. Many observers noted that Clinton's attempt at clarification actually made him look worse, since it suggested he hadn't really meant what he so clearly said at the conference. Some Clinton loyalists attempted to defend the former president by arguing that Abbott's response was unnecessarily harsh or disrespectful. However, these defenses gained little traction, particularly among conservatives and independents, who saw Abbott's counterattack as entirely appropriate given Clinton's initial provocation. The confrontation significantly elevated Abbott's profile beyond Texas and into the national spotlight. What had begun as a tense exchange at a Democratic event quickly became a national news story, introducing Abbott to millions of Americans who had never seen him so directly challenge a Democratic heavyweight before. Republican fundraising groups reported massive increases in donations following the viral exchange. Small-dollar donors in particular seemed energized by Abbott's willingness to stand up to establishment Democrats and defend his record with facts and receipts. Several conservative organizations immediately began floating Abbott's name as a potential candidate for higher office on the national stage. While he was already a well-established figure in Texas politics, his performance in the Clinton exchange demonstrated the kind of political skill and backbone that many Republican voters were looking for in a future presidential contender. Political consultants noted that Abbott's response had all the elements of effective political communication: clear messaging, strong preparation, emotional authenticity, and strategic timing. His ability to turn a potentially damaging attack into a career-defining moment impressed many political professionals. The Clinton-Abbott exchange became a case study in how American political dynamics were changing. For decades, Republican leaders had often been expected to defer when confronted by Democratic icons like Clinton, even when those figures were critical or dismissive. Abbott's response signaled that this dynamic was no longer acceptable to many members of the GOP's new generation of leaders. His willingness to confront Clinton directly with documentation and undeniable facts provided a template for how other Republicans might handle similar situations in the future. The exchange also highlighted ongoing tensions within American politics about its future direction. Clinton's centrist approach, which had been successful in the 1990s, was increasingly seen as out of step with today's polarized environment. Abbott's response represented not just a personal victory, but a symbolic victory for conservatives who believed that Republican leaders needed to be bold, unapologetic, and unflinching in the face of Democratic criticism. The legal profession's reaction to the exchange was particularly noteworthy. Bar associations and legal advocacy groups praised Abbott's demonstration of legal knowledge and his command of constitutional law, which he had honed as both Texas Attorney General and a justice on the Texas Supreme Court. Several prominent legal scholars wrote opinion pieces defending Abbott's qualifications and explaining why his judicial and executive experience represented exactly the kind of preparation needed for national leadership. They noted that Abbott had dealt with complex constitutional disputes, federal regulations, and systemic challenges, precisely the kind of experience valuable for governance on the highest level. Conservative organizations across the country issued statements praising Abbott's response, noting that his legal and political background brought a unique perspective to national leadership, particularly his understanding of how constitutional law and state governance directly affect people's lives. In the months following the confrontation, the exchange continued to influence American politics. Abbott's national profile surged with speaking invitations, media appearances, and fundraising opportunities flowing in from across the country. Clinton, meanwhile, became more selective about his public appearances and seemed to avoid direct confrontations with other rising conservative figures. Some observers suggested that the exchange had effectively ended his role as a dominant voice in internal Democratic debates. The confrontation also influenced how establishment Democrats approached their relationships with Republican leaders. Several veteran politicians were seen making more effort to show respect or avoid direct dismissals of prominent conservative governors, apparently learning from Clinton's mistake. The confrontation didn't just capture American attention, it resonated internationally as well. Political observers in countries around the world took note of the exchange as an example of how democratic societies handle generational and ideological clashes. European commentators drew parallels to similar power struggles in their own parliaments, while African political leaders praised Abbott's response as an example of effective advocacy and preparation. The exchange was translated into multiple languages and shared across international social media platforms, making it a global moment rather than just an American political story. International law and political organizations also weighed in, noting that Abbott's defense of constitutional limits on federal power highlighted the universal importance of checks and balances in governance. His response became a talking point in discussions about the value of state sovereignty, judicial experience, and diverse paths to political leadership. This global attention further elevated Abbott's profile and demonstrated that his moment of triumph had implications far beyond American partisan politics. It became a symbol of how preparation, competence, and courage could overcome attempts at intimidation, regardless of cultural or political context. The Clinton-Abbott exchange raised important questions about the future of U.S. leadership and the role that experience, diversity of perspective, and generational change should play in shaping the country's direction. For many observers, Abbott's response demonstrated that today's conservative leaders possess the skills, knowledge, and backbone necessary to confront establishment figures head-on. His preparation, legal expertise, and political instincts suggested that concerns about Republican governors lacking the stature for national leadership might be overblown. The exchange also highlighted the importance of respecting different types of experience in governance. Clinton's dismissal of Abbott's record revealed a narrow understanding of what qualifies someone for leadership, while Abbott's response showed how diverse professional and executive backgrounds can actually strengthen political institutions. As the United States continues to evolve and adapt to changing demographics and political realities, the Clinton-Abbott confrontation will likely be remembered as a pivotal moment when the old guard's authority was successfully challenged by a new generation of leaders who refused to be intimidated or marginalized. Beyond the immediate political implications, the confrontation became a teaching moment in law schools and political science programs across the country. Professors began using the exchange as a case study in effective advocacy, strategic preparation, and crisis communication. Students, particularly those interested in constitutional law and state leadership, found inspiration in Abbott's example. His demonstration that thorough preparation and legal knowledge could overcome even the most intimidating opponents became a powerful lesson for future attorneys and public servants. Political science courses incorporated the exchange into discussions about power dynamics, partisanship, and the evolution of political communication in the social media age. The confrontation provided a real-world example of how traditional political hierarchies could be challenged and reshaped through skillful rhetoric and strategic preparation. Perhaps the most important takeaway from this entire exchange is the message it sent to rising leaders, particularly conservatives seeking to stand firm in the face of establishment pressure. Abbott's response showed that preparation, facts, and confidence could overcome attempts at intimidation, regardless of who was doing the intimidating. His willingness to confront Clinton directly with documentation and legal expertise provided a powerful example of how to respond to political attacks. Rather than accepting criticism passively or reacting emotionally, he used professional skill and preparation to turn the attack around completely. The exchange also demonstrated the importance of understanding and respecting different paths to leadership. Clinton's dismissal of Abbott's conservative governance revealed a narrow outlook, while Abbott's response showed that executive experience and principled stance can strengthen political institutions and inspire public trust. As America continues through an era of partisan divides and shifting demographics, the Clinton-Abbott confrontation will likely be studied as a moment when new voices refused to be silenced, and leaders proved they had the skills and knowledge necessary to govern effectively. Greg Abbott didn't just defend himself against Bill Clinton's attack. He showed the entire nation what the future of conservative leadership looks like. What do you think about this confrontation? Did Abbott go too far, or was his response exactly what the situation required? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more coverage of the political moments that are reshaping American democracy. The next generation of leaders is here, and they're not backing down from anyone.